Hi, welcome again to another edition of Books I've Read. I have notes. This time I have notes. I think they are a good idea because this book was really pleasant. I think it's a prescribed book for Chinese high schools, specifically in outside the mainland, or just it's. Or I think I have an assumption based on how small it is. So this is the smallest book I've read all year. It's tiny and it's interesting. It's called Chinese Cinderella by Adrian Mole. I think I'd read this book when I was younger. It wasn't a prescribed group in South African curriculum, but I think it's a prescribed group. I think also in Australia have a slight intuition that it's actually a prescribed book. So I came up this so I the reason why I started reading this book because my mom has just seen anything with China, she just like throws it at me, and I think that's so interesting because when I lived in China, there were lots. It was also like how I ran towards South African books whenever I gave the opportunity. So for her, it's like the opposite, having not been exposed to China. Hers is anything that has the word China on it, Chinese. She just always assumes I'll be interested. So turns out I wasn't interested in this book, so I didn't read it for quite a bit. I sat on my shelf for like, I don't know, 2 months or something. And after I finished reading, what was the last book I read? After I finished reading the last book I reviewed, then I read this one. Okay, so Chinese Cinderella. First and foremost, Cinderella as a tale is very popular. That did Disney Cinderella, yeah. But Cinderella as a book is very popular amongst cultural groups. And so, in this specific story, it's not the original Cinderella, Chinese Cinderella. And here on this last page, she speaks about the original book. So the original book about Cinderella. So she says, so for many years, the story of Cinderella was thought to have arisen in Italy in 1634. Iona and Pete O'Pare in the classic fairy tales published in Oxford University in 1904 consider the original Italian Cinderella story to be the oldest European version. We now realize that Duan Shengshi's Yi Xian predates the Italian tale by 800 years. Cinderella seems to have traveled to Europe from China. Perhaps Marco Polo boarded from Beijing to Venice 800 years ago. Who knows? So the story of Cinderella is about like a mistreated stepchild and her overcoming that. And so the author writes an autobiography about her own life and the struggles of how she comes to being accept herself, and how she accepts herself specifically during the time of the Cultural Revolution in China. So when mainland and when the separation of mainland and later on Taiwan, how they just split in Hong Kong, how it became a split country. And so she writes, it's very historical. So I wrote a few things down. Imagine. This is definitely, without even a doubt, like and on our content we had Adrian Mole. I don't know if Adrian Mole is an autobiography about a teenager coming of age. This is a similar type of book, version of the book, but her story, Adelaide's story, is very colorful because hers goes down during the end of World War II, the start of the Cultural Revolution, and it spans it like I wrote that she goes from Shanghai to Tianjin to Hong Kong to England. So she has a very colorful life. So book worth reading, and I know there's a lot more authors who can come out of Asia and can write such colorful stories. So it spans 2 continents. Tianjin, Shanghai, Hong Kong in itself are like 3 different places. And then she goes to England, and she doesn't speak about that in this book, but I think she speaks about it at a later stage. So the book is about her. So this is Ta, this is her and her book, and her pain of being a daughter to the fifth child to a widower. So a man, it's not wood. I forgot. I actually don't know the name of the person who predeceases his wife. So I think it's a widower. You can tell me at the bottom what's the correct form of this name. And the pain of sort of being his daughter, the widower. So at some point in the description, in which she describes how the only time her father remembered her actual name after her stepmother stepped into the family was when they were on a flight and he had to write down her name. And he says, "What is your name? I don't know your Chinese name." And it's a very obscure book. Okay, it's short, it's light. I think it's, how many pages is it? I read it in 1 week. It was very nice. I like quick books, but it's an easy read. So maybe there's a more like high level reading book. But this one is fine. This is like I think I read it in 1 week because it's prescribed for grade 8, so it's kind of easy read. So it's an obscure book because the girl has to deal with her stepmother, but also has to deal with the hatred. Not that so much hatred, but like deception of her siblings and her dislike of her father. But she has love that comes strongly from her aunt, and that's kind of the light of the whole story, is that's where she got the title Chinese Cinderella, from her aunt, and the fact that she had to believe in herself. So the themes that came out of this book that I found was the pain of being a daughter to someone who, like, being the daughter in a family, the interesting relationship of names in Chinese culture. So like in Zulu, for example, you have a name for your aunt, your sister's oldest sources, your dad's sister is a name. Your mom's sister is a similar name. Your mom's older sister is one name. Your mom's younger sister is another name. So you don't just call everyone aunt or uncle, or and so in this complex thing is the names of people in Asia. So for her name is like, she has an older sister, so there's 5 of them, and originally there is 5 of them, and then there's 2 from the step family that joins them. So the names of the siblings are different according to their birth order. So in Chinese language, you have older sister is called Jie Jie, so that's big sister. Then older brother is called Da Ge, and then the second older brother is called Er Ge, second older brother. The third older brother is Sa Ge. So I could just imagine that was very interesting for her. Instead of using her family's actual names, she uses their birth order and how you can. So if you're a Western culture, you probably won't be accustomed to that kind of naming convention, and so she that was kind of a theme that, oh, okay, it's a reality. She didn't see her aunt as auntie, whatever. Her aunt was like dad's aunt Baba, that's, so that was an interesting education out of this book. Then another book is about how and the relationship with her and the people who love her, and how they've chosen to showcase that, and including her yeye and her nainai, her grandfather and her grandmother, and her aunt, who, despite her being mistreated and disliked by her nuclear family, is she's supported by her extended family unwaveringly, like without completely, you see. So that was really nice to see. And so just seeing how unwavering love with that. Then this book is about overcoming barriers. Okay, she goes from Shanghai after World War II, Cultural Revolution, Japanese invasion, goes to Tianjin. So it's like there's a lot of elements. I don't know if you've seen the movie Empire of the Sun. This book is like not but it has the feeling of the period. And when you read about her bicycling to school, choosing to take I don't know if it's a bus or a tram or not being able to take the tram, having rickshaws. So it's like all these like historicals, that kind of, yeah. And then it's also about the important, and then the last thing that I came in this book, second last thing, is the importance of friendship. So throughout how she navigates friendship, and how people who might be your family might not be as supportive to you as your friends are. And so that dynamic of friendship, very interesting part she shows, and how through seeing other people's lives and love and how they arrange their lives, that she's able to see that I can not be I can't close myself to this situation I'm currently facing. There's so much world to see. And even that friendship, and how society deals with different people, and girls specifically. So there's a lot of girls in this book. There, she went to a girls' all school, only girls' school, only girls' boarding school. Her sister is her older sister is her betrayer, her aunt. And so the kind of how she navigates friendships. And I think a theme that also comes from friendship and just goes back to unwavering love is the treatment of girls in previously between that era, and how being a girl child is one of the most difficult things to overcome, and her to be Adelaide being a success at the end of the story is something that could have not been achieved, or could have been achieved. So that was an important theme, the girl child. And then lastly, my favorite part of this book was about, so there's history in it, a little bit of history. So she describes how she ended up with boarding school. She was in boarding school a little after the civil war between Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek for the control of China. So just a little after, she went to Tianjin at the height of the conflict. And that kind of gives you a picture of what kind of family she have, how kind of step parents she had to deal with. They really didn't care about the fact that there was a cultural revolution happening, so long as she went to university, learned English. Went to school, learned English, and she got away from them because they didn't want her in their house. They saw her as a burden rather than a member of the family. So here is, just wanted to read this part of the book, which I found so interesting. So there's so this book also, so I did mention the language aspect about cultural description of her describing, instead of using her brothers or sisters' actual names, she describes the birth order and how she would have actually spoken about them. So you won't call your brother by his name, you'll call him older brother or younger brother, so depending on the context. So that's, and there's this portion, So once she's traveling within Shanghai, Tianjin. So in Shanghai there's different dialect. Tianjin is different dialect, and her stepmother in this book is a half French, half Chinese lady, and she makes an emphasis on her learning different languages. And so I think there's an emphasis on the stepmom wanting her to learn as many languages as she can, to the detriment of her learning her native language, which is Shanghainese. So her native language is Shanghainese. Ma? So her stepmom wants her to, so her stepmom is a native, is like a multi-racial individual, and so she can speak French and Chinese, and so she wanted, so one of, I think, the carriers of the relationship between the father and the stepmom is the fact that this woman has access because she speaks French and she can speak. So the father sees more worth in the stepmom than he would in his own daughter. But in a attempt for her to be like not to be like, but like to be better, to live a better life, the parents actually went out of their way to ensure that although she's Shanghainese, she can speak Tianjinese. Is it Tianjinese? Hey, I don't know. Please correct me. So she speaks. So this is what my favorite portion of the book is, that how she has a conversation with her grandfather, and how in the conversation she says, I don't see the need of learning Chinese because what does she say? The only way to succeed in the second half of the 21st century is to be fluent in English. So that's what she's been told by her stepmother and by her teachers. It's like, you don't need to learn English, like you don't need to learn Chinese, it's useless, you have to learn English. And so her grandfather goes into a poetic discussion of why she has to learn English, or she has to learn Chinese and be fluent in it, and take care to actually learn her native language. Because, as he says here, you may be right in believing that if you study hard, one day you might become fluent in English, but you'll still look Chinese, and when people meet you, they'll see a Chinese girl no matter how well you speak English. You'll always be expected to know Chinese, and if you don't, I'm afraid they will not respect you much. So that kind of and then it goes on. Besides, China is a huge country with vast population and Asian culture. Though life has to be lived forward, it's only understood backward. Reading Chinese history will enlighten you in ways no English language, no English writing can. So the grandfather speaks to this, and he's like, little girl, recognize that no matter what you do, no matter how great you become, this is your background, it's your culture, and there's nothing your stepmother or anyone can do to rebuke that. Then he just gives a poetic story about the origins of the Chinese language and how you can see yi, shi, tan, pin. There's this link, no, I don't know what this is. It says cocoon, tool. So he I don't know if you can see this, but he enlightens her on why the language should be important to her. And so this is one of the lessons about language and how it's important to her being who she is. And what I took from this book, is that everyone has a story to tell, and your story might not be as delightful as hers, because to have lived in such colorful places at the start of the 21st century, you really have lived a very good life. And so it really paints a picture of hope, and that one can overcome a lot of things that they face, truly, if they would want to. And that should you not, you can always count comfort in the people around you, um, um, who love and care about you. And so I really enjoyed reading this book. It's so light reading. There's no politics, nothing. Just like, here's my life. And I really enjoyed her journey, and I would recommend this book to you to read if you have no context of, if you want to read more about China. Really, if you want to read more, just a little, like, light reading about China, not the politics, not the BRICS, not the One Belt, One Road, just light reading, so that you can have a context of how a lot of people who've come out of the Cultural Revolution, who grew up during that period, some of the issues they've had to face to be where they are now. And so, yeah, it's a great book. It's really short, 200 pages. You can read it on one day, really. And yeah, it's not political. It's so soft. I really enjoyed that. And if you have any recommendations of books like this that I could read, I really welcome it. You can put them in the description below. No, sorry, put them in the comments below. In the description below is where you can get the book. Okay. Yeah. Enjoy the rest of your day.